Now, between 1970 and the early 1990s, thousands of people died in what's widely recognised as the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS after being given blood products contaminated with HIV and hepatitis C. Under an initial compensation scheme, only victims themselves or bereaved partners can receive an interim payment of about £100,000. But 2/3 of the victims who died were not in a relationship, meaning essentially they receive no justice. Well, joining me now is Jason Evans. Jason is founder of Factor VIII, which is a campaign for the victims of the contaminated blood scandal and their families. Jason, welcome to the show. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good evening.
Just tell us your story, Jason, because it's a very personal experience of what's brought you to this campaign.
It is. So my father, Jonathan Evans, he was born with a blood clotting disorder called haemophilia. And like virtually all haemophiliacs who were around in the 70s and 80s, he began to be given what was then a new pharmaceutical product called Factor VIII. And unlike the previous treatments for haemophilia, this product was incredibly dangerous. It was made by mixing together the plasma donations of up to tens of thousands of people. And as a result of being given that product, my father was infected with hepatitis C and HIV, and he died of AIDS when I was 4 years old in 1993.
Oh, Jason, I'm so sorry to hear about that. And so tell us where you think your campaign is at the moment, because this scandal did hit the headlines again just before Christmas because there was a big vote in Parliament, which was won. There were many campaigners. But tell us sort of where our listeners, where this sort of campaign is and what's happening with this compensation scheme, because a lot of people are not getting access to this compensation scheme.
That's right. So at the minute, to be blunt, we are a little bit stuck. The inquiry, the infected blood inquiry, published its final compensation recommendations in April last year, and it recommended that a full compensation system should be established before the end of last year, which obviously now has gone. It also recommended that interim compensation payments of £100,000 should be made to all bereaved families, as you mentioned at the opening, because as you say, 2/3 of bereaved families have received nothing to date. And just as an aside, you know, in my opinion, that includes actually some of the very worst cases that I'm personally aware of. I mean, you think it's bad that I lost my father at 4 years old, but I don't think it really scratches the surface of some of the loss here. We're talking about parents who lost multiple children to AIDS at a very young age. We've got a young man in our community whose father, mother, and little sister all died of AIDS by the time he was 3 years old.
Oh my gosh.
So we're talking about entire families, and these are the very families that are excluded from compensation at the moment, was arguably some of the greatest, loss you can imagine. And so the inquiry has made those recommendations in April last year, and so far the government hasn't responded to a single recommendation that Sir Brian Langstaff, the chair of the inquiry, made. And so, you referred to the vote in December. At the moment, what we're having to do is drag the government to action through beating them in votes in Parliament because of the fact so many Conservative MPs support our cause and are willing to vote against the government. The Victims and Prisoners Bill, which is the bill on which we had that vote, which defeated the government, and huge respect to MP Diana Johnson, who is really a leading cause in Parliament on that. Now it's in the House of Lords, and we've just put down another amendment, which is the inquiry's recommendation 12, which would get those interim payments to the excluded bereaved families. But we shouldn't, as much as that sounds like, oh, great, we've beat the government in a vote, we shouldn't be having to do that.
And I think what people don't realise is that, as you say, it was a big moment, and I say this with no joy. It was sort of a big moment because the government lost that vote. So a lot of Westminster watchers were like, "Oh, this is interesting because the government has lost this vote." Not, "Oh my goodness, let's dig into this issue." And for you guys behind the scenes working with, and you say, Diana Johnson was very much at the forefront of this. As you say, there were many, many Conservative MPs who were very, very clear that they supported you. That is a lot of work for you. You're a victim of this, having lost your father. As you say, there's others with equally sort of harrowing stories. That is a lot of time and work and emotional labour to keep having to work at sort of building these campaigns.
It's an awful lot of time. The political lobbying, the time we spend as now doing media, and also trying to get the facts about the scandal across to the public, because I do strongly believe that in the public at large, there is still not an understanding of what really makes this a scandal. The fact that we're not talking about people who, unfortunately, by accident, were infected through blood products. We're talking about a product which 20 years before it was on the market, in 1953, the World Health Organization, the inquiry has this document on their website, said these products should not be made. Yet 20 years later, they were, this process of mixing together tens of thousands of donations. Andy Burnham, former Secretary of State for Health, now Mayor of Greater Manchester, he said this week, and he said previously, that when he was Health Minister, he was told that no one was knowingly given infected blood products, something which he says he now knows because of the evidence in the inquiry, to be a lie. And just one final point I'd make, that the public must understand, people were not unfortunate. Every single bottle of Factor VIII in the 70s and 80s, every single bottle was infected with hepatitis C, given to children, adults, men, women. Every single bottle was infected with hepatitis C. And it's only thanks to the people in Parliament, to our lawyers at Collins, solicitors, to the campaigners in the community, that we've managed to break at least some ground. And we just don't understand, when we've heard this evidence, the governments have heard this evidence, their lawyers have seen this evidence, why there's this refusal to do what's clearly the right thing to do.
But Jason, I think, and I feel, honestly, I feel quite embarrassed just being honest with you about this. I didn't know all the details about this. I have learned more from this conversation with you about the absolute kind of travesty and the tragedy behind this scandal. So many questions now. I mean, that story you told me about your own dad, but that story you told me about families literally wiped out with this. And also the question of how on earth was this product, how on earth does it clear the sort of medical scrutiny to be signed off as a product?
Well, we've seen, in respect of one pharmaceutical company, Bayer, which have been involved in many scandals over the years, including making Zyklon B gas in World War II.
Wow.
We've seen in the inquiry documents which show when they applied for a product license, the regulatory authority here asked them for information about the size of the plasma pools, how many donations they were mixing together, and where was this stuff coming from? Because as we know, these American companies were collecting plasma from prisons, from South America, from overseas where the regulation was much less. And the regulatory authority here, the licensing commission, went back to Bayer and asked them these questions. And ultimately what Bayer did was, instead of providing that information, they had a subsidiary company set up in the UK. The UK company applied for the license, and those questions that were asked of the American company simply weren't asked, and they were able to just bypass the regulator.
Wow. I mean, the guile in terms of involved to sort of avoid these questions. Jason, we have come to the end of our time. It's been such a fascinating conversation, and clearly this is something we should be talking about a lot more. This is something that we should be shining a light on. I mean, just very quickly before I let you go and we get to the news, do you think I mean, I know it's such a sort of cheap, kind of corny question, but do you think something like a drama would help? Do you think, that could help just raise the visibility of this issue?
I mean, I'm sure it would certainly help with the public understanding of the facts.
Because it's such a compelling story. I mean, it's such a human story.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that we've had shows on, like It's a Sin, that was on Channel 4 that looked at, the emergence of AIDS. And I think the true facts of this scandal would really shock people, because, I mean, we've only really scratched the surface. We haven't even talked about the non-consensual infectivity trials and things that sound crazy unless you've actually sat and watched all the inquiry evidence. So look, I think a drama, it probably would help, certainly with the public understanding. But I suppose the question is the same question that was asked in Parliament this week, is why should it take a drama just to get justice?